Guys, my name is Lauren Boutin. I am team lead at Boutin and Company, and I am teaching today on how to write a purchase agreement. And I have two people in class, but I'm also recording for the folks online. So it'll be a bit interactive with my people in class, but also the folks online can follow along with my screen share. I think that's how Elijah set it up with the Zoom. So hopefully that all works out for y'all. Okay. So if you have your laptop, please open up the MLS and then open up North Star, the little transaction desk. Underneath tools, it'll be the third selection, transaction desk, MN Realtors Forms. Let me know when you get there.
This is not the computer I normally use.
That's okay.
Your computer you normally use like saves it all.
Yep. And if you have issues, you can always look up at the screen too, because you can just kind of follow along if you don't want to do it at the same time.
Okay.
Whatever you want to do is fine.
Okay. I look at my number. You have your number memorized already? I got first three.
You got it. It won't take long after you enter it every single day to look at new listings.
Yep.
You'll catch on pretty quick. So you've been here a little bit longer. Have you gone through PAs yet? Have you written one? Okay, perfect. Like with you have one under contract. That's right. Good job, Joe. So this might be a little bit of a review for you, but we'll just kind of go through basics. You guys ask questions. I want this to be as interactive with questions as possible. But of course, we're going to try to stay on topic to get you guys through this class quickly. All right. So in Transaction Desk, mine might look a little bit different than yours. You can edit your home screen. I'm not going to go into all of this right now because that's really the Authenticign transaction class. So it's a different class, but you can change your home screen with this little lock button to move these icons around, choose different ones. I like to create a transaction, create a standalone signing just for like a one-off doc that's not part of a transaction. Like yesterday, I added my husband to my team, so it was a standalone document, right?
Adorable.
Yes, very excited.
I'm gonna move over so I can see her screen.
Yeah.
It's gonna take me like 100 years just to find my number. I don't know where it is.
Yeah, just follow along.
Just gonna look over at yours.
So I like to have my transactions right here so I can go through and go to any of the transactions I have going on or had before. And then I also like to have my Authenticign. So these are actual docs that have been signed.
Okay.
But that's just me.
Mine does look different, so I'm just checking.
Yep. So if you hit the little lock button, you can drag and drop down different things. So I have the little house that says create, which is this one.
Yep.
Pen, create for a standalone signing. The little house transactions, because it's like right? Each transaction is like a loop. If you ever use .loop, same thing. And then recent Authenticign. So if I have a doc I sent out for signing and it's one of the persons has not signed it and I need to resend it to them multiple times, I don't have to go and search for it. It's right here at the top of the list, right? Okay. So today we're going to go through writing an offer, / a purchase agreement, right? So I'm going to click create a transaction because it's never a standalone signing for a transaction, right? For an offer, because it's a full packet of docs that you need to send for signing. And hey, if they get the house, you probably want a hub for additional amendments after an inspection for repairs, or if the closing date gets pushed back, or et cetera, right? Have it all in one hub, make your life easier. Do not start just doing standalone signings for everything or you will regret it. Okay.
So you did
create transaction. So clicked on that, and we're gonna pick a new listing to go off of.
We don't have that. How do you, hold on a second.
Let me show you.
We don't have that little box like you do. We have this.
So you're gonna drag
Okay.
this one down,
Okay.
and then drag that one down,
Gotcha.
and then you're good. So go ahead
Now
and
we
lock
look
it back
like
up.
Okay, now we're twins. Now we're twins.
Yes, we've got it. Okay.
Yep.
So we're gonna use just a listing that's on the MLS because it's easier rather than just making something up. So today we're gonna use this one on Acorn Lane. You don't need to, or Archon Lane, my bad. I'm a little dyslexic sometimes.
Yep.
So You guys don't have to toggle back and forth, but this is what I do. So I would go to the MLS, I would find the listing we're writing the offer on, right? And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy and paste the name into my transaction.
The address.
Yes, thank you. And then I'm gonna do dash offer, because this isn't McKay, like a last name, buyer rep. This isn't someone's address dash listing rep. This is an offer. I'm gonna make it abundantly clear for myself. My template, I have some templates y'all won't have because I customized them, but I'll use the one that KW provides so you can use the same one, okay? So under templates, I'm gonna choose residential sale packet. We're not doing a listing packet because we're not listing a home. We're doing a sale because this is a purchase, okay? I know it's a little weird with the verbiage, but you'll catch on. Okay, the reason why we're doing that is because we want to import all the data from the MLS without having to do a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo and writing it all down from hard copy on a piece of paper. You can if you don't like computers, but the more familiarized you get with this, you can write an offer in 10 minutes once you get really good. For now, it might take an hour. That's okay. All right, so next we're going to be doing importing data. Well, that's going to be coming from North Star, right? Because that's our MLS. So now we need to go back to the listing, and right here, this list number, that is the MLS number. Every single time you do the same process, you're going to copy that and you're going to paste it into here. That's going to auto pull all the data for. Now it already has me as the buyer's agent because I picked residential sale. The buyer's agent, I'm writing the offer, right? It'll always choose use wizard, use that, just leave it alone, click create. Questions so far? Perfect. It'll take a second because it's just auto pulling everything. Now this is going to go through the same steps, the first 5 steps. It's going to be the same every single time. We'll edit it a little bit, but we're really not editing anything at this point, okay? So you can see, sorry, I'm a little winded. You can see if you go down, it has the address, it has the MLS number, the year it was built, it has the PID, which is the county identifying number, the prop ID, okay? It also has a brief of the legal description. Now, it's not the full legal description because sometimes they're a page long. It's the of it. That's what actually transfers the ownership of the property of that specific property address. It's legal, okay? Comments, price, all that stuff. Don't worry about it. This first page, you don't need to do anything. Next, right here, this button that says next. Now, I'm gonna edit here where it says offer date. If you're submitting the offer today and writing the offer today, I mean, it might, like maybe your clients don't end up signing, send it the next morning, it's fine. It's the date that you're writing the offer. So I'm writing the offer today. 8, so I just click the little red button, that is today.
So if you were like preparing for tomorrow, like you're gonna give this offer tomorrow.
You could do tomorrow instead.
Most of the time you wait 'cause someone.
You need to do it as soon as
I mean, we don't wanna,
humanly
like-
possible.
Yeah, like you could lose,
You could, very easily.
you put an offer in, they say yes to it, you lost
Yeah,
it.
yep.
We don't really wanna do that, but.
Yep, always time is of the essence, especially we're in spring market. You're gonna see the hot properties gone the same day. It is what it is. So get your clients in there as soon as possible. Not that you're pushing them, just explaining expectations, okay? Now, if you're putting an expiration on it, you can do it here. I highly recommend that you do not do that. In my experience, this is just personal opinion, so everyone's different. In my opinion, it pisses off the seller, and it pisses off the agent because you're putting them in a box, and that's the time limit. What I would recommend is if you put it in the offer or in the email when you're submitting the offer, we would greatly appreciate a response by today at 6 p.m. or if you have that, right? case there's more properties that they really like, and if they aren't gonna get this one, they're gonna move on. It kind of puts a chip away from your favor, in my opinion, just from my experience, because it's like, okay, you're locking us into this tight time frame. Maybe your sellers are not analytical thinkers where they're just looking at the numbers. Maybe they're emotional thinkers and they need to sleep on it. Well, you're now limiting their thinking time and it might work against you.
Would you recommend, maybe like a phone call after it's submitted?
Oh God, you should be calling them before you even write the offer.
Right, and then just saying, you know,
Sent it, just make sure you look for it.
yeah, and we would just like a response as soon as
A timely
possible.
response. Yep.
Because, yeah, but just putting it in the offer, you just think it's kind of rude.
It doesn't fare well in my
In your
opinion, in my experience, especially when people put it on me and they need I mean, I've seen it with like 2 hours. No,
You don't think it puts, like, it doesn't put, yeah, I understand.
it can put like a bad taste in the mouth. I'm not saying you can't do it or you
It's just
shouldn't.
not being effective in the way you want.
It might vote against you. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Good feedback.
But everyone has different opinions, so do as you please.
Well, in case your client just has it, we have the option, if they want it, and they're. we have
I
the
see it
option.
from both sides, like if your client's out there wanting to put offers on things and.
And they're ready to
and they
move
can
on.
only put one at a time.
Right.
And if the seller is sitting on something for a couple days, I mean.
Oh, and right, if it's gonna take a week
Can
to
they
respond,
rescind at any
oh,
time?
absolutely, you
Okay.
can rescind your offer anytime. So if you submit an offer on Monday and you still don't have a response on Thursday,
You can take it back.
absolutely.
Okay.
All you have to do is send,
Especially if you find another house you like,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, they're not getting it back.
Right,
Rescind it, and you
exactly.
get the offer.
Yeah, if you're getting the workaround and they're just kind of like playing you because they're waiting for more offers to come in, yeah, you can pull your offer, absolutely.
Okay.
Good
Did
questions.
you warn them, like, the realtor saying, hey,
Yep,
you're back?
yep,
I'm just kind of asking.
yeah, no,
No, we do have another, we're gonna be looking tonight, and if we don't hear back, we may be rescinding, just
Yep.
leave that.
Yep.
Just keep the
in a nice
communication.
way. Yeah, because you always want to, keep your relationships good with the agents in town, because the minute that they have 10 offers on a property and you piss them off, you might be
They're gonna
going to the bottom of the
remember
list. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's good or not.
Joe.
Okay, moving on.
Got it.
Press the next. We're going to step number 3. These are the people in the transaction. Okay, so these are all the people that are going to be signing, etc. I personally always remove the listing agent and their brokerage. Their name and everything will still be on the purchase agreement for dual agency and, stuff like that. But I don't ever want them to accidentally get a document that they shouldn't get, or somehow get my client's email, or just something weird to happen. So I just remove it. That's a personal preference. Do as you please.
You're removing listing agent and what else?
And their
And
brokerage.
the brokerage, got it.
Now I'm going to add my clients. Well, if I'm writing an offer, what do I already have?
Second,
And what have they already signed?
buyer representation.
That's right. We don't write buyer rep at the same time as an offer 99.9% of the time, because that's not really legal. We should have already had that buyer under contract so that we have that committed relationship. I'm not going to dive into that right now, but what I'm saying is their contact information most likely is already in here, unless they signed hard copy at your buyer consult, right? So let's say we are creating a new transaction contact because they did sign in person. Then I'm going to create a new transaction contact. They're going to be a buyer. And I'm going to put in Joe. I'm just going to use your name.
I'm gonna do Bob buyer, I always use Bob.
Perfect. And then I'm gonna do jk@aol.com, because that's just hilarious. I know, just from yesterday, it's in my head from the team meeting. So I created my buyer. Now, what do you also need to make sure of, because this is a document, you need to make sure it's their full legal name. Now, maybe this Joe Kelly, her full name is Jolene. Well, then I would need to put Jolene Kelly in here. Well, what about middle names?
Yeah, what about middle initial?
You
Use
should,
that?
it's a good idea to always put a middle name in there. because it differentiates between ownership. So if there's Joe Kelly here and a Joe Kelly here, but yours is Jolene Ray Kelly, it just further shows that it's you.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad idea. I always like to add legal names before I have them sign anything. But we're gonna pretend like it's just Joe today. All right. So I have me on there as a buyer's agent. I have my client Joe and my brokerage. Now, not legally married, so it's just gonna be her purchasing this property herself. All right, so we're gonna go to next. Now we have our forms. This is the KW template. So you're gonna have all of the docs in here. They set up to be in here. If you create your own template, you can change the docs that you want in there, make it your own. You can autofill what you want to have autofilled every single time. I do, because it's just easier for me. We're using the KW format. Right now, we're not going to edit the forms. We're going to wait till we're transaction, and then we're going to go in and edit and play with those forms. Okay, so right now we're just going to hit next, and then we're going to hit done. Your transaction dashboard might look a little bit different. That's okay. If you want it again, hit the lock button and you can move things around. So what we're really just going to focus on right now is going to forms. So to edit all your forms, at the bottom, there's a little forms. Do you see that on your perfect? And that's going to bring up all the forms. That's why I go into that. I don't just click each doc because it's very not user friendly. So if you're new and you need to remember all the docs you need, use your transaction checklist. Okay. I've been doing this like almost 8 years, so I don't need it. Y'all should use that until you feel super confident. Okay. Because that's going to show you every single form that you may or may not need.
Print it out? Should I print it
Yeah, I loved having it printed out and like on my wall, so I could just look at it every time and be like, okay, yep, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. If you want to go into it per transaction and click, okay, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, you can. It's up to you. Because that is the listing agent.
Okay, so that's what comes up on the list.
Yeah, I don't use that form,
Okay.
so, but Arlene is the listing agent in this
on that house?
listing. Yep. So we're going to go down and go to the earnest money receipt. This is the first document you're going to have that you're editing. So when I write an offer, I put my docs in a very specific order, right? I have my cover, which is my offer summary, which I customized, made my own, made it abundantly clear. So if they have 10 offers and they're looking or presenting to the seller, they just have to look at the first page. I mean, yes, they're gonna go through and look at everything because there's fine details. It just makes it easier. They see the price, they see the earning, they see the closing date, they see any additional
That makes
thing.
a difference when we were navigating this last weekend. I mean, the ones that had a summary and the ones that didn't, it was so painful.
Because you're going back and forth and back and forth. Even if they put in the email, you're still going back between the email and the
But some people didn't even have it in the email.
Right.
It was literally just scrolling.
sometimes they forward you the transaction,
Yeah.
like with just the link,
Yeah.
and say nothing.
Yes.
Well, guess what? If I've never done a transaction with you, that might have gone to my junk folder. And if you didn't text me to give me a heads up of, hey, my offer's in your inbox,
You wouldn't even look for it.
that's happened to me before. With me, obviously, but like a different agent was submitting an offer on my listing and I'm like, I never saw it. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
They're like, well, maybe you should have written a nice email. You should have called me ahead of time to see if there were any things that you could pull for your buyer to like get the deal, right? Maybe there's a preferred closing date, maybe, you know,
Yeah.
X and Y, right? Good rapport, good communication is essential. Just get in the habit.
Relationship.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to fill this out. This is the earnest money receipt. So this is showing the amount of earnest money, but it's also basically showing that I am representing this buyer and I am showing you that, yes, they do have these funds and this is what they're submitting, okay? So today's date, the date we're writing it is the 8th. We don't need to put the time on there. So just skip it. And then the amount, well, excuse me, this house is 444,000. It's a listing. Rule of thumb is minimum 1% of the purchase price for your earnest money amount. So that would be 4,500, right? I want to beef it up the most my buyers will allow me. So in this case, my buyers are like, yeah, that's fine. And we can put that down. We have access to that money in the next 48 hours if the offer is accepted, right? Because it needs to be cash in hand in your bank account, right? So we're gonna put 5,000. The more, the stronger your offer looks to the seller. It means you're not messing around, okay? Check number. You can either do TBD or you can do trust funds. 99% are gonna be submitting earnest money through trust funds, unless your buyer has a trust issue and they don't want to do it electronically, fine. But then it's a paper check or a cashier's check, and it has to be dropped off right at the PA, usually to the. I put trust funds because I already have explained that to my clients. They understand we're going to be doing that electronically for record keeping to make sure nothing gets lost and to keep, like, I can provide that documentation from trust funds straight to the lender once that's been processed through.
Is that like an app that we use to like send grab money from them?
Yes. So it's an app, but it's on the MLS.
Okay.
So let's say you were going to go submit you got your purchase agreement accepted. Within 2 business days, you have to have that earnest money submitted. There's this little bird looking icon. You're gonna click on that from the listing on the MLS. This is the only place you can do it. Don't go into the trust funds, like pull a tab down at the top. You need to go into that specific listing, okay? And then you're gonna determine who's holding that earnest money. Most of the time, it's gonna be the listing brokerage unless you wrote something else on the PA. We'll get into that. So you would click the listing broker, continue, and then you would put in your buyer's name, their email, the earnest money amount, a secret word. This is just like a safety thing. I personally always do the name of the street just to make it easy. So on this one, I would do Archon, whatever it's called, this weird.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the way the letter up in my
Yeah,
brain.
me too.
So I would put Archon Lane. That's just my personal preference. You can do whatever you want. You can put in Santa Claus. I don't care. So there is a $5 convenience fee. I personally always have the buyer pay it. If you want to pay it for all your clients, go ahead. It's your business. And then you
You're
are
saving them Gabby. I mean,
Yeah.
correct. And the cost of a paper check,
yeah.
because checks aren't free, right? So we're also going to certify that this purchase agreement is fully executed. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and hit notify buyer. This email will go over to your buyer and it'll ask them to pay,
So
right?
question now. So when you're saying like that it's all signed by everyone, then
Fully executed. You never send earnest money until all signatures are on the purchase agreement, counter offer, whatever, till it's fully executed.
Oh, counter opting.
Everything fully executed means 100% done, right? Then you're going to be sending it to your lender in title, unless it's a cash offer, then it's just a title. And then you're moving on, right? You're scheduling your inspection if there is one. You're doing all the next stuff. We're going to go back to. All right, so we're going to also date this, the amount, whichever way you're submitting it, and then today's date again. Technically, this one can be just their name written, or it can be signed. I just have them sign it. And then what I do at the top, go down to save and click save. So it's file, save, but you're clicking this one. Now to get to the next form, I could just have clicked save and exit and then go into the next form. But what's even faster is to go to transaction forms and it's going to pull them all up for you. You don't have to go out and back and out and back and out and back. So let's just go straight to the PA. Short for purchase agreement for those who may be super, super duper new. Okay, so it already has today's date on there because we auto put that in. It has my buyer's name on here because we already put that in. Isn't this just great? We gotta put in the amount of earnest money. So today we're doing 5,000. It'll auto spell it out for you.
Awesome.
This part right here, the earnest money shall be delivered to the listing broker, or if check to, then you would check and put in if you were not delivering it to the broker. So let's say it's a really weird small town brokerage, like in Alexandria, Minnesota, and whatever, they took a listing down here for some reason, right? Well, my client, maybe it's a really small brokerage. They don't have trust funds because the really small ones don't. Well, my client's not driving to Alexandria. Maybe they don't feel safe mailing a check up there. Okay, your other option then would be to either have it delivered to Keller Williams, or it can be by the title company. So say you're working with Rochester Title, then you would put that in there. Most of the time, it's going to the listing broker, so you can just skip that step. Okay, questions yet? Good. So it's got the address in here, it's got the legal brief, right? Like we talked about. Now, if this was a double parcel, meaning it was on more than one, right? It's the same, it's one house, but it's got a double lot, or it's on acreage and there's two parcels of land, then you would want to put that in here. So I would put in the legal like this, and then I would put like a period, and then I would do PID da 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 and PID da 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 da, so that they know both of those PIDs are part of this purchase.
That's what I was like, should you make it, you wanna catch that?
Yes, and you're also going to tell title, but that is something they look at because that's how they transfer the ownership.
I own one, 2 parcels.
So is mine.
Yeah, so you guys get it,
They're
right?
paying for taxes. though.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is, I'll do like a loan for my windows and then they'll pay it off and they'll only pay one parcel off.
Yeah.
And so then it's messy.
Uh-huh.
So I've had to clean my title before. And I'm like, oh, this is horrible. And I'm explaining it to them. And one's Torrens and one's abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't be combined because they're in 2 different
Okay,
additions.
got it.
And so I think it's a tiny little sliver and my house is on it. I don't know, but it's weird.
Yep, and to pay to, if you're, if
And
it, if,
explaining it to people that don't know, they don't get
Yeah.
it. You're like, I'm sorry, but.
so there's always kind of like little idiosyncrasies, right? But that's how I make sure. If there's multiple parcels, I put all the PIDs
Yep.
in that spot. If it doesn't
Weird.
fit, you can always put it on an addendum, not an amendment. We're not amending anything yet. Nothing's executed yet. We're adding it, so it's an addendum.
Addendum addition to amendment runs over.
Correct. Good job. So the next bit, we're talking about personal property, right? And fixtures and what is technically and legally supposed to stay at the property. Everything in here is said to stay at the property, right? So this talks about even things as small as garden bulbs, things like that, right? It talks about window shades and
Does say
blinds.
sheds in there. Does say sheds.
So it does. It says play sets, sheds, carpeting, ceiling mounts, doorbells, and if built in, dishwashers, refrigerators, wine and beverage, blah, 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 blah. Whole
Say
bunch.
Keep my shed, how would you say?
I'll show you.
Okay.
So this line is going to be, line 33 is also things we want to say, like to stay at the property. And you can repeat what's already in there just for extra protection. Line 36 are going to be the things that absolutely stay at the property. So what I is all sellers' personal property. That means if there's a whole bunch of shit in the garage, it's not staying or we're not closing. We get to our final walkthrough and all that crap's still in there. We're not closing tomorrow. Get your crap out.
Who's place as seen as, not the.
You
Which
can.
one is that? Remember that one lady said that they had a washer and dryer there and then they go to buy and then they got like a different washer and dryer?
Correct. So I'll show you that.
Okay.
So I go to the listing, scroll down, and I go to where it says appliances. I'm just gonna copy and paste what's listed there. Okay? And then I'm gonna say as, this one has a lot, as seen on, say we went and looked at it today, so 2/8/2023. So yes, that is assuring that you are getting the same refrigerator, the same washer and dryer. They're not gonna swap them out for a cheaper, shittier set, right? That does happen. So let's not have that happen to your clients, right? And then I'm gonna look back and make sure the agent didn't forget anything, right? Because people make mistakes. Dishwasher, disposal, a clothing dryer, an exhaust hood, a water heater, microwave, a range, which is also a stove.
I would have thought water heater would have been in there, but okay,
They don't always put them in there,
because it doesn't say furnace.
but
You know what I mean? Like,
I know it's an odd thing, but doesn't hurt to throw it in there. And if they have it on the listing, you might as well just keep it in there, right? Refrigerator, the clothing washer, and the water softener. Now, it mentions in their shed, right? I'm still gonna write shed in if there's a shed. Personally, I just wanna put every protective layer in there possible, okay? Okay, perfect, cool. Well, let's say there's a swing set and
And dehumidifier, sometimes, I always put the dehumidifier. if there's-
if your buyers are, it's technically personal property, but it's also technically written in here, but it's still, so it's not gonna stay unless you write it in there. But don't just go and write it in there unless you've talked with your buyers and they say that they want it. Because what if they don't want it and then now you're speaking for them?
And then they gotta get rid of it because they're expensive. They're not-
Yeah, it costs money to get rid of crap at the dump, right?
Mhm.
So let's say there's a swing set on the property and your clients are 70 years old, they don't have grandkids, they don't want a flipping swing set, they don't want to have to get rid of it, they don't want to deal with it, okay? Or a trampoline or a above ground pool or any of that kind of stuff, right? I would add that in here and play set it, and of course it's gonna autocorrect, play set in backyard. There's a period at the end of here already. I'm being repetitive with my periods. But questions on that? 33 is absolutely will stay. 36 is absolutely will not be there. And if you get your final walkthrough and that deep freeze is still in the basement that's 100 years old that you wrote in here that will not be here, or an old oil tank, or whatever, threaten you're not closing. Make sure your buyers are okay with that. Remember, you need to support them, not speak for them. Okay. Now, this property is listed at 444.9. Let's say there's a good amount of interest. It's a little on. Let's write that in at 450. Let's go 5 over. Like, let's hope that that's enough to get this one because it's a brand new listing. There's a lot of interest. Now, if it's market for 6 months, price drops, you're probably not going to write an above price offer, right? Depends on market, all that shit we're not going to go into. Different class. So we're going to put in 450. These buyers have 30% that they're putting down and 70% that they're having financed. I'm going to put a dash in the other two because we're not selling and we're not back for deed. Assuming would be assuming the seller's current mortgage, which actually is the worst idea if you can finagle it the correct way in today's market, because you might be able to assume an interest rate versus 5.5 or 6%. Different conversation. Talk. The lender would have to accept that.
I don't know how hard it is.
It's just more complicated. I personally have not done it, but I know it does happen every once in a while.
One time I seen his husband leaving the wife for the divorce and all the loans.
Sure.
I
Okay.
don't know, yeah.
Closing date. Well, this is going to be a conventional loan today. closing date, you should really ask your lender, right? First, how long do you need to process this loan? Well, we only need 21 days. Cool, awesome. Talk to your buyer. When do you want to close? 21 days is the absolute. When do you want to close? Well, we want to close March 15th. Okay, cool. That's enough time for the loan. The buyer is happy with that. Before I submit this offer, let's make sure that that's acceptable to the seller and for them. Make it a little bit more time because they're looking for their next house to buy. And I find out, oh, well, the seller, because they didn't put it in the agent remarks, the seller really wants March 30th. Okay, cool. Go back to my buyer. Are you okay with that? Yeah, if that'll get us a house, yes, we'll do it. Oh, cool. And we're gonna do March. The week is that? The Thursday. Fine. Offices and banks are open. We're not putting a Saturday or a Sunday or a federal holiday on the closing date because the banks won't be open. You won't be able to fund your closing.
When I buy a house that's empty and I buy investment properties, so I
Mhm.
always put honor before, because I have a super savvy lender that can do it super fast.
But if the seller
But-
says they don't want to close before the 30th,
The
then
seller-
you're not going to do the honor
you're- and then
before
you're stuck, because you wanna do it, but not right, they're gonna still have like stuff to move out.
or whatever the circumstance.
Yeah, but
but-
I always try to, I always like, if I know it's empty, I wanna.
Yes,
get in there
same.
fast as I can.
That circumstance, I do the exact same thing.
Yeah,
Yep.
but then you're like communicating with all parties, and that's an option if the house is empty, if it's an investor.
Or if it's just a seller that wants to move quickly as soon as possible, then moving date can move up. But in this situation, we're gonna leave it as
Yeah,
this.
'cause they
Good
want-
point.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, next page. This mortgage is subject to a financing mortgage, okay, because it's not all cash. This is a first mortgage. We don't need subordinate financing. This is gonna be a conventional loan today, okay? Because my clients are putting 30% down, they're not paying PI, they don't need the government-backed assistance. Great. Moving down. I'm gonna put in a max of 30 years. You can do two things with this, and it's gonna depend on A, your buyer, and B, kind of, every agent does this a little bit different. A lot of agents will put market in there, but let's say this was a buyer that was an FHA buyer, have like $5,000 to their name, paying down payment assistance from Fannie Mae, Freddie, whatever, those things, and they will not be able to, if interest substantially by closing. So let's say interest rates go above 7, your buyer's no longer going to qualify. Let's say they're in that really tight spot. Then it's probably in their best interest for you to put 7 in there and not the word market.
So this is something we're talking about their lending.
Exactly. So that, again, it's a
And then
different
this
type
would
of
get 'em-
buyer.
And this would get them out of the contract if the interest rates are too
Correct.
high.
Correct.
Protect them.
Because if the interest rates went too high and they no longer are able to finance this, then it cancels, or they have the option to cancel. If you put the word market in there and they no longer qualify, you're in a little bit more of a hurdle.
Mhm.
So depends on the situation. These buyers in this situation are very well qualified. They don't care. So maybe I'll put 8 or I'll put market. Again, it's kind of personal preference and situational, okay? But I have had that before where the interest rate did go up so much to where we were able to negotiate another 15 grand off the price because the seller took long to get the survey that
Rates jumped.
personal one for me. So I was able to get a better discount.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't mess with me. Okay. All right, next, mortgage financing contingency. All right, so we're either gonna say that the buyer gets their earnest if they were to default due to financing, right? Or we can supply the seller with a written statement. Written statement, I always choose a date like right before closing, like a couple days before closing, because then it would be, the only conditions left would be like maybe a final verification of employment, or like very few conditions are left. We've already got the appraisal. We've already got all this other stuff done, right? So it's like literally only a couple things. That written statement is just a letter stating that other than these few conditions, this buyer's good to go. You had a written statement and then the day before closing, your buyer bought a brand new $100,000 truck and no longer qualify, well, then technically after furnishing that written statement, then the seller would get to keep that earnest money, right? If you defaulted and had to cancel. So sometimes listing agents will ask for this. Okay, I don't care, that's fine, but I'm gonna do it literally like max 5 days before closing so that there's a very small window of things actually falling apart. It's like just an extra piece stating that, yes, this buyer is qualified. Most of the time, yes, just simple, refunded to buyer. If I want to show that seller, say there's 10 offers on the table and I want to just beef up my offer every single way I can, I might choose written statement. If you want to know more about that, read this verbiage more closely and decide what you think is best in the situation, or you can talk to the broker. Okay, going down. Say in this situation, I just want everything refunded to the buyer. Great. In a more serious situation where there's multiples, you might choose the opposite. All of it would be refunded to the seller because we know this buyer is so well qualified. We are not worried about closing. They're not backing out, so it's situational. And your buyer would have to be okay with that. So make sure they understand. Okay. Next. Okay. When are they going to lock the rate? Either 5 days of final acceptance or at any time prior to closing. Well, interest rate, every week go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. If you're working with a great lender, they're watching that every day. They're on the pulse of that. So I work with lenders that I absolutely love, as you will too. And I know that they're on that. And I know they have a better grasp of that than I do, right? So I'm not going to make my buyer lock it in within 5 days, because what if rates go down during the transaction? But we already made them lock. Now they have to pay a relock fee because it went down. Might not be a great thing for your buyer. It might actually be a hindrance to your buyer. So that's, again, personal preference, but that's what I do.
So you always seem to use that one?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Lender commitment work orders. Work orders are when you have an appraisal. Let's say it's an FH or a VA or a rural development, anything backed by the government. There's certain health and safety standards. Peeling paint, if the house is older than 1978, inside or out, doesn't matter. Broken panes of windows, missing handrails, smoke and CO detectors, GFCI within 6 feet of any water source. Those are the main things they're looking for, right? With those health and safety standards. So if I'm doing an FHA offer and there aren't multiples, maybe I do $200 for work orders. So let's say my buyer's buying an FHA loan, right? They're buying a house and I saw that there's a handrail on the front steps and there's like 5 steps. So there needs to be a handrail. And I'm going to address that during the inspection because I already know from my experience that that's going to come up. If it becomes a work order after the appraisal, things can get delayed.
So work order means like it has to be done before the lender will lend the money?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. So health and safety standards with those government-backed loans. So it's with the appraisal, not the inspection. Okay. But I like to get all those mitigated during my inspection contingency period so that we aren't dealing with these work orders. We're not dealing with lender commitment issue, with those work orders. And we're not paying a re-inspection fee because the appraiser is going to want to come back out and check and make sure the work was done. They don't always accept photo evidence. Not very often. So if this is not a competitive listing, it's been sitting, I might put $200 in here and the seller agrees because, hey, on the MLS, it says they accept an offer, meaning they're willing to make sure that the house passes what it needs to for those FHA health and safety standards.
If it says it doesn't accept FHA and it's been there for a while, would you still try?
So when you're in your showing, you're looking for those health and safety standards. So you see there's a bunch of peeling paint, you see this, you see that. Well, I would have a conversation, just an honest conversation with that agent of, hey, these are some things I noticed. I know you don't say that it'll pass FHA on the MLS because sometimes they're just not educated enough to know that that should be there. Or like my first year in real estate, I was over in Mankato. Every house I sold was like between $70,000 to $170,000 because that's what they are around those small towns. All of my buyers were FHA, like 90% of them. A lot of houses did not say that they would accept FHA financing. So I would go through all the photos very meticulously before I even show it. If I see in the photos it looks pretty good, like it should pass a lot of that, okay, cool. Then I'll go to the showing. Now, if I notice a few things, I'm going to talk to my buyers and say, we're going to try to get the seller to take care of this. If the seller is not willing to take care of this, and this is the house of your dreams, are you willing to come and scrape that paint and paint it again? Because that can happen. That is an option. The buyer can make the repairs if the seller's unwilling and they're like dead set, this is my house. Okay. So again, this is for FHA, VA, or rural development. You don't have to put anything in here, right? If you're in a multiple offer situation with one of those loans, you don't want to.
Well, 200 seems kind of low too, so you kind of got to know like what repairs are you thinking in your mind to get a number, because I was like $200 isn't fixed very much.
But if it's smoke and COs,
Yeah,
that's enough. If it's GFCIs, it would at least cover a lot of it or most of it. If you've got tons of issues, then that probably isn't the right house for that type of loan, right? So it's situational, but in a buyer's market, you would do it the first way. If it's a seller's market, you're going to make it more attractive to the seller. Now, in this case, it's a conventional loan. There can be work orders called on a conventional loan. They're just less common. So sometimes with new construction, with a conventional loan, if the appliances are not in the home prior to close, some lenders will require that. Some builders don't offer appliances. Maybe you need to beef up the offer another 10 grand in order for those appliances to be in there, you know, those kind of things. I'm not trying to make this more complicated, just it's very situational. But most of the time in a conventional loan, you don't need to worry about that. Okay. FHA escape clause. This is not an FHA loan today, so we're going to skip that. If it was an FHA loan, you would just put in the same price as the offer price. And if the offer price ended up getting countered, then this would get changed as well on the counter offer paper. Okay. It just needs to reflect whatever the sale price ends up being. Okay. Next, these are more FHA and VA things. So a lot of times with VA loans, there's extra fees from the lender, which is weird because we can't charge them any extra fees. So if it's a VA loan, a VA buyer, we cannot charge a broker admin fee. Woohoo! Great for our buyers, right? But you need to talk to your lender before you fill this part out, okay? If you have VA or FHA. And that's because there might be other fees. And if so, those need to be noted here, okay? So if your lender is like, no, extra fees, we're good, you can leave that part blank, then you would go ahead and put 0.
What does DVA stand for?
That's Department of Veteran. So DVA is the same thing as VA.
Okay.
Good question. It says funding fee, right? But the lender says there's no funding fee. Then I'm marking that. Okay. Again, this is a conventional loan. So these ones you can leave blank and just skip, or you can just put a dash. If there were any other mortgage financing terms or items you needed to include, then you would want to put them here. So if we're getting down payment assistance and you wanted to put that in your offer, you could list that here. Might not be a good idea, might be a good idea, situational. Questions? Ready, okay. Seller's contributions to buyer's costs. What is also known as, what's another thing?
Closing costs.
Sorry, be also known as seller paid closing costs. The buyer and the seller have their own set of closing costs. A lot of people don't understand that. It's exactly literally what I show them. You have your own, the seller has their own. Well, I heard, my parents, the seller just paid all their closing costs. They didn't have any. That was a different market, first of all. Second of all, I'm gonna say it this way. I'm a little blunt. It's a different market, different situation, yada yada, right? Currently in this market, unless the house has been sitting, you maybe shouldn't ask for seller pays. Well, what if your buyer doesn't qualify enough? They don't have enough cash to pay all their closing costs. Well, then we're going to want to add that to the purchase price, right? So say the house is $300,000 and they need $9,000 in closing costs, and they don't have enough money between the inspection, their earnest money, everything else. Well, the earnest money ends up coming back off their cash to close, but you get my point. They just don't have enough. Then we're going to write that offer at $309 so that the net to the seller is a full price offer. I always explain that in my little offer summary or my email. Like, please note, yes, there are $9,000 in closing costs, but that's why we wrote the offer at $309 so that the seller is netting a full asking offer, so that they don't think it's a detriment. Okay, because some sellers get in their head and they're like, well, why the hell should I be paying that for the buyer? I'm paying my own closing costs. Why am I paying that for them too? Well, honey, they wrote that on top of the purchase price, so it is full asking. Okay, fine. Sometimes they have issues with that. Okay, well, how do you know how much closing costs are? Your lender tells you that, right? Because every banking institution, lending institution is different. They're going to have different amounts. Generally speaking, kind of a rule of thumb might be 3%, but it's not always. So ask your lender if your buyer needs their seller, if they need help with their closing costs. Because the buyer might. So then you need to go back to the lender. Can they afford their own costs, or is that something they need help with? And then that would be a conversation between you, the lender, and your buyer. Okay. So in this case, my buyers are putting 30% down. They got loads of money. They don't need help. Okay. So we're going to mark no. If they did, then you can either mark a set purchase amount or set price, or you can do a percentage. Well, I would choose the percent. Price might be negotiated. No matter what, they're getting the percentage they need. So let's say you're offering less than asking price and you put in 8,000, but then you end up negotiating and it ends up being 9,000 that they really need, but you put 8,000 on here, they're only getting 8,000. So if it's a great offer, you can probably do a set amount, vice versa. Does that make sense?
I think the lender also tells you can only ask 2% of closing costs sometimes.
Usually not 2%, it's usually up to 3%.
Yeah.
But
So on an investment property, I think I got cut. I didn't much, and then the lender doesn't let you do that.
correct,
And,
there is a limit most of the time. So again, there are certain things you just need to verify with your lender.
And your lender can tell you wrong, and that's what happened, is the lender told me wrong, I asked for it, and then we had to.
And then you fix it
we
later.
had to fix it later, yeah.
Okay. Inspections. Do you think it's a good idea for your buyer to have an inspection on their home? Darn right.
Answer's always yes.
Absolutely.
The answer's always yes.
But is it up to you or your buyer? It's up to the buyer. You can inform them. You can educate them. At the end of the day, it's up to them. Okay. That's why we have our KW disclosures. It's from liability. Okay. We're back here. Inspections. Yay. More negotiations. Love it. What do we not use inspections for? Because my client wants to get the house in multiples, and so they're going to offer an inflated price, and then they're like, oh, but actually during the inspection, I don't even care what comes back, I'm going to cut it by 50,000. That's bullshit. We don't do that, right? Rule of thumb, not a good practice. You're not going to get a good reputation. Now, if there is major foundational issues, water intrusion, a bad roof, all this stuff that's equating to $1,000 worth of work, hell yeah, you have cause to be negotiating price. right? But you would need the evidence from the inspection. You should probably have a subcontractor come out there and evaluate the issue. That's a professional, right? And then provide that bid to the seller of, hey, it's gonna cost $35,000 for them to have this basement waterproofed. Like, and the drain tile put in, and the sump pump put in, and the carbon fiber straps put on the wall for the displacement of the foundation. Then you might have those justifications, right? I'm just kind of helping you guys, so you might already know this, but just to keep you on the up and up, okay? So in this case, my buyer is gonna have an inspection. The purchase agreement is contingent on it, and we're not doing intrusive testing. Intrusive testing is like if I had a meter the wall and had a big hole, or I was checking for termites and they placed a drywall out, or whatever, it's damaging the property. We want to avoid.
Can we ever pick that?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
In La Crosse, Wisconsin, you're right at the lumber mill. There are a lot of insect and termite and ant infestations and damage. It is rule of thumb pretty standard for that to actually be something. But I had someone try to pull that shit on me in La Crescent at the top of the hill. Nope. There was no evidence of anything. We're at the top of the hill. We're on top of the bluff. We're nowhere near that lumber mill in the state across the Mississippi. Don't even. That transaction was fun.
Those agents are so used to doing that.
But they're so used to doing it.
To Winona too, and I'm like the same.
Correct. No, unless there's evidence, right?
Right.
Okay.
Is there any reason that the lender would require a buyer to do?
Yes.
Home?
So, not necessarily a home inspection, but some lenders will require termite inspections. And then you have to like really friendly remind them that I know California or Texas or Florida, and that's very common where you are. We're in Minnesota. That is practice here. Experience that you want to share?
No.
Okay.
I thought VA you had to, but.
There are buyers who come in and they're like, I think the bank requires me to do that. That's a.
They think,
They think.
but they get the inspection confused with the appraisal,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Unless your lender literally tells you you have to do this, no,
Pest inspection for the VA pest inspection.
it's not required.
Oh, nice.
In states, that's what I'm talking about. They try to say that it is, but in Minnesota, you can argue them on it, okay? And also if you require it, then put it back on the bank that then you're paying for it if you're requiring this. Otherwise, my buyer is gonna go to a different lender
Mhm.
and then they drop it and it's fun.
Well played, Lori.
So let's say they are gonna have an inspection, you're multiples, but you're not making the offer contingent on it. Well, why would you do that? Why would your buyer have an inspection and make it not contingent? Meaning if something really bad were to come back in that inspection,
They still wanna buy it, I guess. I'm guessing they still wanna.
but what if they don't? Right? Like, what if something were to come back? At least they know. They might be out their earnest money if they cancel, but at least they know and they're not strapping themselves to a $200,000 repair or rebuild of the house or whatever. It's not very common right now in the market to do that. Last spring, buyers still wanted to know, and at least then it's only a $2,000 versus a $50,000 basement repair, whatever. The time you're gonna mark that it is contingent. Okay, so if you mark decline, then you're gonna mark it's not contingent. Make sense? Okay, time period. I have 7. That gives me 7 calendar days from the time the purchase agreement is fully executed with my final acceptance date, right? Which we'll get to and talk about that in a little bit. 7 days gives me enough time to get a hold of my inspector, get that scheduled, have radon testing done if they want to.
I have a question. So you're the one that's like inspector and
Always.
billing them or not the buyer?
I personally, that's a personal preference. I personally do it because then balls don't get dropped and I don't forget or not know of radon testing. Because if they're testing for radon, they're scheduling all this shit and I don't know about it. Also, I have to book it through showing time depending on the inspector. You know, it's more coordinating. Just let me take that off your plate. You can pick your inspector. I have a list of recommendations, but you can pick it, but please let me schedule so that I know what's going on. Because one time I had a buyer schedule her own radon test. Well, it was like a shit show of negotiations with Open Door. So, which I can't say anything bad about another brokerage, but it was just more difficult. I forgot. And I bought her radon mitigation because I wasn't gonna let her get screwed on that. And it was my fault because I forgot that she was testing for it. I was already negotiating all these other things. And I forgot that we were still waiting on that result to come back. Well, I'm not gonna let that be a detriment to my client because I forgot, because she scheduled it, not me. So it just wasn't on my radar. I schedule everything, so I know what's happening and I know what's going on, so that never has happened again.
So they'll call, you give them a list of all the people,
Mhm.
and then they're gonna call and get like prices,
Mm-mm.
okay?
You should have approximations of what it should cost based on prior experience. They can call and interview, they can ask questions, they can ask pricing, sure. Most of the time, depending on the size of the home, that's the biggest thing, location and size of the home.
I was thinking that there's sometimes, like the 7 days, getting someone to inspect it might be difficult in like the middle of nowhere.
Depends on your resources, really. So I work all over southeastern Minnesota in little podunk towns to the biggest cities, right? And I have my lender or my inspectors that I love. So I know that they're gonna get me in. We're gonna be able to get that inspection done, have the time to talk about it, the results with my client. We have the big 30-page report with photo evidence, right? And we'll be able to move on. If you're not sure, you could put in 10 days, just don't go too high because otherwise the seller is gonna counter it. They don't wanna see a 14-day contingency. They wanna move on, right? So again, that's situational, that's personal preference. I would recommend 7 days. And if it's a really multiple offer situation and it's in town, you know, it's gonna be easy for your inspector to go to, you could even do 5, but I wouldn't go less than that.
So then, okay, so you give them the list
Mhm.
or 2,
Or they say you,
okay, or they say choose, and then you'll call and book it.
yep, or text or book it through the
And then
website.
do you tell them like how much it's gonna cost and when it is?
Mhm.
Or they, okay, I got it booked, and this is how much it'll cost, it'll be on your closing statement.
No, the inspector directly, time of inspection.
And then they just do the credit card over the phone?
Depends on the inspector.
Bills?
Some want cash, some want checks, some are okay with credit card or
So
all
that's
3.
At the time you book it?
Yeah.
Or her?
Them,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah.
And like some of them, like I work with Larry Iverson all the time. He's my fave, him and his are great. But there's also like Rick Erickson. I can book that online. I'll know the exact price. I'll know, you know, You can do it that too. Whatever you want. I love Larry and Taylor. So I go and I text Larry and I'm like, hey, I need to book this through showing time for you, right? He goes, yep. Okay, they also want radon. Okay, I'm gonna drop that off Friday at noon. Can you book that on showing time too? You mark it as inspection, and then under the other part, you would do radon drop off. And then again, for the radon pickup, so that the seller knows when to be there. So we just went through this. I was on this to the seat, and we talked about the buyer reserves the right to test for radon at their expense. So what this is saying is the buyer may or may not test for radon. If they do, the buyer is paying for that test. Does not say that they're paying for the mitigation system. This is just notifying that the buyer does have that right to do this. It's a good idea to put that in there, okay? You just want to be in great communication. You don't want to be pulling in fast ones. I mean, every listing agent should be educating their sellers that if you don't already have a mitigation system, the chances are very likely that the buyer will be testing for it. But then you're relying on somebody else to do their job. You don't know if they've had that conversation. So you should put that in there, in my opinion, just to make it clear that that could end up happening. Now, could that work against you? Multiple offer situation? Potentially. But it's up to your buyer. So that's a conversation I like to have with my buyer before we even write the offer. Do you want to test for radon? Mitigation system here. We don't know the levels. Is that a concern? What is radon? You can go and explain to them, yada, yada, right? Chances are in some levels, 3 out of 4 times come back high. It is the leading cause of lung cancer. It's not my house. I'm not living here. I don't care. It's up to you. You're the buyer. Guess what? It's an extra 150, 200 because they got to pay. Depends on the size of the house and the floor plan of the house. Some houses need 2 mitigation systems. General rule of thumb, if it's a really small rambler, might be like $1,200, $1,300. I always say maybe $2,000 because it depends. It's never the same. But that's generally just kind of what I say. And I will always put that on the seller to pay for it if it comes back high. Otherwise, you're asking for my buyer to assume a house with unsafe levels of a toxic gas. Okay. Sorry. All right. Next is the sale of the buyer's property. So say your buyer needs to sell their home in order to buy a new house, right? They need that money from their equity for their down payment, yada, 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 okay? Well, then you would be marking this as a contingent offer, contingent sale, right? In this marketplace, if the house has been sitting a little while, they might be open to that. If it's a brand new listings and there's 5 other offers, you're gonna be the first one out the door if your offer is contingent, especially if it's not on the market yet or not under contract. If your buyer's house is already on the market, already under contract and pending, it's a good deal, right? Like you really don't need to worry about that because you're already pending sale. You're through all the contingencies. It should go through, right? So that's a much stronger offer. So right now when you're counseling your buyers, we like to get their houses on the market and under contract at the same time that we're looking for a new home. And the house that they're selling, let's do a 60-day escrow so we have enough time to find your next home. You could also make your sale contingent on finding your new suitable home, just as an extra precaution, okay? So let's say your buyer did need to put their house on the market, it's not even on the market yet, then you would mark the addendum that it's gonna be contingent sale, it's not on the market yet, you'd fill that addendum out accordingly, okay? Let's say their house is on the market, it's under contract and it's pending, then you would put in here their address and the date that it's set to close. Then you'd probably want to line those dates up, right? Because if their house is scheduled to close March 30th and you're writing this offer for March 30th, great. Then we just need to make sure we're scheduling the closing date adequately so funding can go through and you can close all in a domino, okay? In this case, my buyers don't need to sell their house, lots of money. It's a great buyer. It's awesome. We can just mark that it's not contingent sale. Okay. That's a conversation to have with client before you even start. Questions? Okay. Taxes and assessments. Woo! We're prorating taxes because that's the best. It's easiest and title can just deal with it. I'm not doing math. Don't ask you unless it's like calculating commission. Now, let's say it's in a homestead or it's not in a homestead. I personally always mark that the seller shall pay the difference unless it's multiple offers, then you switch it. But I always mark that they will because oftentimes they don't catch it And if it's not homesteaded, then they're paying the difference in the taxes for my buyer and they're getting a better deal. I like better deals for my clients. Okay, next page. Seller shall pay, seller shall pay, seller shall pay, seller shall pay. Depends on the market. But assessment, the bane of my existence, they're so much fun, especially when you don't know about them when you're writing the offer.
So I was wondering, when are you checking for these? Like, you've already checked?
So
There could be sneaky ones that aren't quite.
that aren't assessed yet,
Yeah.
or they've been notified of the assessment, but it's not officially assessed yet, right?
Mentioned it yet.
Or you walk and you're doing the showing and there's lines all over the sidewalk. That means an assessment's coming. So really fun. One time I helped a buyer, we marked it all the correct way, woohoo. And the assessment hadn't been levied yet, but they had received written notice that it was coming for a sidewalk project over in Northeast, because they redid that entire area. So this was a great agent that I worked with. It was Josh Huglin, with Coldwell, and we worked together. We talked with the city. We figured out the cost per square, per size of the square of the sidewalk. It was a corner lot, so there were a shit ton of them. And we calculated an estimate of what approximately it was going to end up costing my buyer within the next couple of years when that work was completed. Because of course, crap gets delayed with the city, right? Well, it was like $4,000. It was not cheap, right? If I was less educated or didn't know and just didn't do that, she would have been stuck with that, right? Technically, it wasn't levied yet, but it was delivered notice. Okay, there's a difference. Luckily, that seller worked with us and he cut, I think they might have done it under the table, but let's just say they put it in her cost, an extra $4,000, right? Well, it came back a couple of years later. They ended up doing the work and it was like $20 shy of our estimate. We did a great job. We got very lucky, right? You might not be able to deduce all of that to that great extent. Luckily, it worked out really well in my situation. You never know. It could be a property getting annexed into the city and then it's septic and well getting switched to city water and sewer. It can be all sorts of different situations. So if it's not on the county record when you're writing the offer, back up. It's not on the MLS as a listed assessment. You always should check your county records before you submit your offer and go back taxes, assessment, kind of stuff, right? Otherwise, you hope and pray that title will shift during. Okay, but right here, we're marking whether or not the seller has or has not received notice. Not that it's been legally levied, but have received notice. You're always going to mark no unless you see something on the county records that sways you. It's up to the listing agent to change that or the seller to change that, whether or not they have or have not received notice. Okay, I'm not going to go more into that because we're going kind of over on time, so I'm sorry. Okay, next. Previously executed purchase agreement. Now, this is what you do if let's say you're going to show a house that's active contingent sale. So they've already accepted an offer from a buyer that needs to sell their home. You want to sneak in there and write an offer and you're going straight, you're not doing any contingencies, let's say in the situation, and you want to knock that first offer out of this purchase agreement is subject to a cancellation of a previously executed purchase agreement. That is the one they already have. So you need to talk to the agent to figure out the dates that you're putting in here, because you're putting the date that the offer or the other agreement was executed, and also like there, and that's based on how many days that are on the addendum from that purchase agreement that they already have, right? So if say that we have 2 business days to, once we get a second offer, to have their home pending. Otherwise, we're bumping you and we're going with the next one. that's the date that you put in there. So you have to talk with the listing agent to get that date from them. Okay, we can go more into that another day. All right, next. Warranty deed is the strongest way to convey property. That is what pretty much always going to be marking. Every once in a while, you'll end up with a different kind of deed, like a trustee's deed, like if somebody died and it's in a trust, or if it's open door, they might do a separate type of deed. Generally speaking, you're going to always do deed. That's possession. When are they going to be taking possession of the property? This is a personal preference thing or an experience thing. I personally always mark immediately because I don't allow my buyers to close unless the house is ready. Meaning if they don't have their shit out, things aren't done, the furnace went out the morning of closing. It also depends on when you have your final walkthrough. You don't want to have your final walkthrough a week in advance. Should either be like really the night before closing or the morning of. The only issue with having your walkthrough the morning of is if there is an issue, you have no time issue, you have to push back closing. You really don't have an option. If you do it the day before and you see that something's leaking, you have a little bit of buffer time to get that fixed and still be able to close on time. So kind of depends on your client's schedule also and what they can accommodate, right? So I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just you need to be vigilant at that final walk. Do not start a washing machine because they can leak if there's nothing in them, especially if it's a front load. But you can start a dryer, you can start a dishwasher, you can turn on the oven, all the burners on the stove, check the refrigerator, make sure it's plugged in. Is the fridge cold? Is the freezer cold? All those kinds of things, right? Check windows, make sure that they're in the same condition as they were before. You know, you're making sure all the agreed upon repairs are also completed. You should have the paid invoices and that you wrote into your inspection amendment, right? Your repair amendment. You should probably have the verbiage in there that the seller will furnish to the buyer's agent all paid receipts and invoices prior to the buyer's final walkthrough, right? Just depends on the situation. But you're gonna make sure visually, okay, yes, this got done. This got done. Okay, yes, they removed all the shit in the back. This is done. This is done. Because a lot of times when there's stuff left in and they're like, oh yeah, my seller's gonna get weekend. Guess who's there hauling it out when it doesn't get taken? You. Or you can tell your client to deal with it themselves, but are they going to recommend you to a bunch of their friends? Probably not, because they're paying the transaction. You want to leave a good taste in their mouth. Okay.
I have a question on that one.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, let's say I'm selling a house that has renters in it.
Yep.
Then I would put possession. What would I put for that if there's a like get possession because the renters are in there?
Still taking possession.
Yeah.
So they're still going to own it.
Yep.
So it'd still be immediately after.
Okay.
They're just not moving into it, maybe. Right? And that depends on their lease agreement and legal terms and everything.
Got it.
Some agents will do other and do 24 hours after closing, just in case there were any kind of BS that needed to be resolved.
Okay.
I personally choose immediately after closing because we'd like to get all of our due diligence done ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Talks about a bunch of terms, read your purchase agreements, make sure you understand them. Here, you're choosing what form of disclosure is the seller offering you. Now, legally, this is also very annoying. When it's an agent-owned property, they legally cannot provide you with a disclosure alternatives, even if they did not live in the property. So as an investor, if you're selling one of your investment properties, you have to do the full disclosure. You'll often see alternatives.
And then you have to say something.
That's up to you and how you want to handle that. I'm just telling you what's legal, okay? So based on what's on the supplement listing, we go, oh, there's no supplements yet. It's a brand new listing. They might just not be of it. If they're not here, then you got to email the agent. Don't call them, don't text them, email them because they're emailing it back to you, right?
Ironically, I bought lots of, 6 houses. I've never seen any disclosures. It's my real estate agent. So I think it's so funny that I'm like,
What?
how come I never saw any of this stuff? I have a new girl, so it was like, oh,
Yeah,
so I'm just like,
I like to send disclosures, oftentimes before we even look at a property.
yeah.
Just so, or I take
So
a
are they
quick peek
still-
at them.
Are they still on record, like for houses I bought? They're gone once they're, I know, I'm like,
Nope.
it's just interesting. that
It should be part of your purchase agreement. So you could go back through and look.
Okay, I have them, so I'll see.
So
I'll
a
see.
lot of times they're gonna be the regular disclosures.
Mhm.
Sometimes they'll be the alternatives. Just look at what's available, okay? Moving down. You're marking whether or not this house is city water and sewer. This property, it's in town. I already know that, but I'm still gonna go and look just to show you guys, okay? Let's see where we are right here. Water, sewer, water and sewer connected. Yay. Easy, so much less work for you. Guess what? I sell a lot of rural properties. A lot of mine are not city water and sewer. So I would have to mark no, no, septic, well, and yes, subject to an addendum. Because if I'm helping a buyer purchase a rural property on well and septic, A, I want septic in compliance or the seller's paying for it. B, I want that well water tested, but I also want the well itself inspected and tested for the well pump. Most agents miss that because they're not educated to know to ask for that to be done. That could be the buyer's expense to have that done, or it could be the seller's. It's negotiable, right?
How much does that cost?
Varies. Depends on the well, how deep it is, what type of well it is, if it's a sand drilled well, if it's not, if there's a lot of variables,
I've never
right?
had wells, I don't know. No, yeah,
So
I
you
don't
could
know.
call Thien well in drilling and ask some questions and get a little more educated on it.
Okay.
You can also check the Minnesota Health Department for the well boring and drilling, BORING, boring and drilling records to see if that well with its identification number is on record. Because they could have a sealed well on the property.
Yeah.
And if so, that needs to be on there. Okay, that needs to be on the well disclosure.
Would the listing agent know that or no?
They should if they're smart and do their job in their proper due diligence, but sometimes they don't, and they just rely on what the seller tells them. A little bit of our job is investigative research, which I love.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm kind of nerdy about it,
Mhm.
but I want to explore every avenue of protection for my client, right? And I want to be educated on everything. So when I first started, like for the first 3 years, I went to every single inspection. I asked questions during the inspection. I didn't just go to the review portion.
Right.
I would walk along with my inspector because he was a friend of mine. I
You
made
can always
friends with
people
him.
tell you, or if you have a question and you learn, yeah.
But
Awesome.
if you're sitting there asking so many questions that you're pissing them off and making them take an extra long time, just know your place. You know what I mean? But if you work with a good inspector, they're probably going to take that time to help you.
Mhm.
At least go to the reviews, please, with your buyer. And if your buyer can't make it because of work, you can go, or you can wait till you get the inspection report back. But as a new agent, highly advise you're there for their inspection, even if they can't be. So you can see firsthand
So does
and you can
well-
fully
when the well is
understand.
inspected, is it through the inspection guy that you
Nope.
hired? It's a
Nope.
different system.
Yep.
Okay.
Completely different. Same with septic. So septic, you might be calling Hofschulte. Well, you might be calling Thien. Depends on the geographical location of where the property is. Okay, so this property is city water and sewer. There is no septic, there is no well, there is no addendum for a well inspection or anything, okay?
Mhm.
Next, home warranty. Woohoo! Everyone has their own opinions on home warranties and if they're worth it, if they're not. Different companies make a big difference, right? Some inspection companies or warranty companies, excuse me, are wonderful and cover a lot of great stuff. Some of them are a complete waste of money. It's all situational. It's up to what your buyer wants, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you as an agent offer home warranties to all your buyers. Whatever, maybe that's your closing gift. I don't care. It's not my business. If your buyer's gonna ask for this from the seller, then you would mark yes and be obtained by the buyer, because I want to choose the company. with my buyer. I want to be the one select known pre-existing conditions. I want to be the one choosing all those protective things, right? I don't really want the seller doing it for me because they're just going to choose the cheapest, sometimes shittiest option, right? So I always choose that it's going to be obtained by the buyer, which means you, because you're going to do it for your buyer, and then paid for by the seller, if that's the way you're asking this, okay? And then to be issued by, you can either type in Home Warranty of America, or you could, like the company name, or you can mark buyer's choice. And then you can decide that later. So usually that's what I would do, is buyer's choice, okay? Oftentimes nowadays, we don't ask for a home warranty. That could always be negotiated into an inspection too. Maybe there's just piddly things and the appliances are getting older and some of the mechanicals are a little bit older, but not old enough to have to ask for all new ones, whatever. That could be negotiated into a repair amendment. So sometimes it's just better to wait until you know if you really need to do that. Depends. Now, this situation, are we in dual agency between me and Arlene?
No.
Correct, because we're not at the same brokerage. What if it said Keller Williams Integrity Lakes? That's our office up in Uptown, Minneapolis.
My guess is no. I don't know.
It is not dual agency because we're the same technical like umbrella of Keller Williams, but
Each office is independently owned and operated.
That's right. Good job, Joe. So she's the seller's agent and I'm the buyer's agent. Okay.
That's such a good piece of information. So it would have to say Keller Williams Premier Realty.
Correct.
So if it says Keller Williams, anything else?
Anything else, not dual agency. Okay.
And it's, sorry to.
Oh,
but
go
it's
ahead.
Keller Williams Premier Realty is like Rochester. What about
Austin.
Rochester, Austin, Woodbury?
All of southeastern Minnesota, not Woodbury. Well,
Yeah.
it just, you got to
So
read it.
that's what it'll say.
So if it says anything else, sorry. Hey, I'm wrapping up my class. Can I call you right back? Okay, sorry, it's running long. Okay,
We're having too much fun.
So
that's okay. I just have a noon, whatever, it's fine. Okay, so in this situation, dual agency does not exist. So we're marking that again. So if dual agency does not exist, does anyone need to sign this?
yes.
No,
It doesn't exist, yeah.
it'll auto-populate, delete it. What I do every time is if it's not dual agency, when you go into Authentisign, it'll auto-populate your buyer's signatures right here. Delete it, and then I use the little tool and I draw a line through it. So that way, if they don't have their seller sign it, you're not agreeing to dual agency, you don't sign it. Okay, good job, guys. And if they do, it's not a big deal, but I'm very OCD with my
Yeah.
paperwork and I like because I was a TC, transaction coordinator, years ago. So I just want everything to be
Right.
da-da-da-da-da. Yep. Okay, next, scrolling down, other. Are there any other terms that we need to include? Well, maybe. Situational. Are we putting extra personal property here, like a big screen TV, a couch, any of that kind of crap? No, we don't want the lender to see that. If you're putting extra stuff, use the Keller Williams personal property agreement. It's not an addendum, it's not an amendment. You do not mark any of these boxes. It is a separate agreement, okay? You don't send that to the lender because they're gonna make you remove it from the PA. They don't like that. Don't put that shit in there.
Really?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Sorry, I swear a lot.
Same.
So don't put that in there, okay? Don't send your lender personal property agreements. Don't send them the disclosures. Don't send them a repair agreement unless you want them auditing your paid invoices, which you can do yourself. Melissa, my business partner, Melissa Adams-Goyle, she likes to do that. I don't, because I like things just to be clean. Now, if there was a septic escrow, hell yeah, title needs to know about that, lender needs to know about that, that's different, okay? But personal property, always keep that separate, okay? If it's extra stuff. not appliances and stuff.
Like lawnmower.
Yes, that would be extra. Put that on a separate agreement. Because otherwise they're gonna want like paid receipts between parties and all this other jumbo bumbo, and they're gonna tell you, hey, this really shouldn't be on here. You need to give me an amendment removing that from the purchase agreement.
Yeah.
It makes more work for you. Just keep it separate. Okay, now say you were working with a for sale by owner, or you were asking for the seller to pay you 3%. Maybe you weren't having your buyer make up the difference if they were only offering 2.7, and you, let's say you're negotiating commission, or it's a for sale by owner. You need to put your commission in the purchase agreement with a for sale by owner. The little commission disclosure, that does not give you your money. Okay, so if you were writing this in for a FSBO, for sale by owner, you would write the seller, not the listing agent, not the listing brokerage. The seller or sellers agree to pay the buyer's broker a commission of whatever you charge. I'm gonna charge 3% of the final sales price upon successful closing.
Would you do this if in the MLS they're offering like 2.5?
I would negotiate that with my buyer in this market, in my buyer rep. I would explain now my commit, that's a personal thing. That's however you want to run your business. You don't have to, you can accept 2.5, especially if your buyer doesn't have very much money. Like, probably shouldn't ask them for more if they barely qualify, right? But let's say you've been showing these people houses for a long time. You might want to have that in your buyer rep, that they agree to pay the difference if there's a listing that only offers 2.5 and you want 3. Maybe your minimum is 2.7. You kind of work with them to where they're only paying that 0.02 difference.
Could you put it in the purchase agreement?
You could. In this market, most sellers / listing agents will kick that back and say no. You could add it to the purchase price, so that way your buyer is really just mortgaging that difference. Technically, your buyer is paying you, so don't tell buyers that you're free.
Right.
Lots of agents do that. It's not really true. It's being added to their mortgage, because otherwise the purchase price would be $20,000 less or
Right.
whatever, right? So they're mortgaging your commission is really the way it is.
Right.
Okay, so yes, I had to do that all the time in Mankato, because you're not supposed to do standard commission, but the average commission in Mankato is 2.0.
Right.
It's 4% total. Okay,
Wow.
I moved back for a reason.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time I would put in there 2.7, because I came from the city. I'm from here, but I was working in the cities where everything was 3.3 on the list side, 2.7 on the buy side. That is the cities. Here, for the last forever, it's been 3 and 3. Now it's shifting
I know.
to 2.5 or 2.7
For the buyer.
for the buyer's agent. That's up to you and the seller. Technically, all things are negotiable. So yes, Joe, you totally could ask for it. Just don't necessarily count on it, because then they're netting less than a full asking offer, right? Depending on the situation. It's just trickier in this market in Rochester. Okay. Also, you don't know what they're getting on the listing side until you get the Alta or the closing disclosure. You don't know. They might be only taking a small amount of commission. Maybe it's their family that they're listing it for 1%. Maybe they're getting 2.5 as well. You don't know until you get to the very end. So,
Can the buyer's mortgage,
so it would be added to closing costs. Or you up the offer price by that $300 difference or that $3,000 difference.
and then it's the
And then it would be the
seller.
seller. Yep. It's a little sticky. So a great way to explain it is during that buyer consult. Now, every once in a while, we'll see a property that might not be offering the 3%. That is what I charge. That is my commission. Okay. So if we go to a for sale by owner that's not willing to pay me then you'll need to decide whether or not you want to move forward with that property, because then you would be assuming the cost of the commission, right? Or we might see a property every once in a while that is paying out 2.5%. If that is the case, I will let you know ahead of time before we go to see it. But you might end up being the one that pays that difference between 2.5 to 3%. We can either add it to the mortgage or you can pay it at closing. Right? But the thing is, you're offering value. And if you're offering a discount, that's fine. That's your choice. When you're taking a listing and somebody else, they're saying, you know, well, somebody else will do this for 4%. Okay, great. Is that the only value they're offering you? Because they're already negotiating their value and their worth and their cost. Do you want me to be so willing to drop my commission that I don't care about money, where I do the same with you, your money, with the sale of your home, that I'm just willing to drop your purchase price 20 grand if we get a lower offer? Or do you want me to stand firm and get you your full asking price? It's all scripting, right? Okay, so sometimes you add that in there, other clauses, other things you might put in there, okay? These are all the different types of addenda, which is plural, if you have different types of things, right? So I'm not gonna go much more into that right now. Okay, next page. You don't mark this when you're writing an offer. This is if the seller's countering your offer, then they need to check this box. Sometimes they forget. Okay, not gonna go into it. You really also should not be marking for the seller whether or not they're a foreign person, because you don't know. And that's for them to check. A lot of people check it for you. I just think general rule of thumb, let them do it themselves. Just make sure that it does get checked one way or the other. Okay. Now my buyer, I only have one buyer, so it's just gonna be her. She's gonna be signing here. Do we put final acceptance in here yet? No, because it's not fully executed. What is final acceptance? What is fully executed?
Everything's done, agreed to.
And delivered to both parties. So let's say we're in negotiations, I end up going to bed, I get the fully signed offer back from the listing agent at 11 o'clock at night. I'm already asleep. I'm not looking at my phone. My buyer gets this the next morning. I email it over to them. That's electronic delivery. That is when they get it. Final acceptance is that next morning. Even if they put it on here that it was the 8th, my buyer didn't get it till the 9th. You change it to the 9th because that is the start of your inspection period. So make sure it's upon delivery. That's the final part of it. Don't let someone argue with you. Tell them, talk to your broker if you don't understand that, okay? Be vigilant on that, because it can screw you 24 hours out of your inspection contingency period. That's why it really matters the most, okay? Also, earnest money delivery date, deadline. Your buyers and sellers will always sign this. It is not that they're agreeing to arbitration. It is that they acknowledge that they have received and have had the opportunity to review that disclosure, okay? Which is optional. They don't have to agree to it. I don't care. Do what you want. But they do need to acknowledge that they have received that option. Okay, last page, wire fraud again. They signed this with their buyer rep. They need to sign it again with the purchase agreement. Okay, so then you would do file, save, go to the next form. I'm not going to go through all these forms, but there's different things, right? We don't really use the COVID one anymore. That was obviously during the thick of it that they came up with that. There's a blank addendum in case there's any extra like weird terms or things you needed to add, or I don't know, like an escalation clause, things like that. Arbitration, you always need that in there, whether or not they agree. Remember, it takes all parties to agree in order for that to be in effect. If one person declines, then the whole thing is declined. And you can just put in big red letters, decline, on that page, okay? Compensation disclosure. You don't send that out with your buyer rep because you don't know what the compensation is going to be, and it's property specific. However, does the listing agent need that? No. Can you send it with your offer? Yes. But then they'll also know your broker admin fee, which you may or may not want them knowing. And B, the buyer's contact information is auto inputted. So if you send that with your offer, make sure you delete your buyer's email, their contact information. You don't want the listing agent having your buyer's direct contact info, just in case they're sketchy. Okay. The rest of that, the buyers, you've already done that with your buyer rep. And if you had septic, then you would go ahead and go to this form. I'm just going to show you it really quick. We're not going to go through the full thing, but I'm going to show you what I was talking about. So you put in the date, then you're going to go down. There is a septic. I always do 21 days that they're going to have the septic tested. Okay. And at least have the results back. That doesn't mean it needs to be in compliance within 21 days. It just means that they're getting their shit done and they're going to have that tested. Okay. And who's paying? So you would mark this 21 days. Who's paying and obtaining this? That's negotiable. I'm putting it on the seller every single time as a buyer. I don't want my buyer to have to assume the cost of replacing the septic, right? This does state that a valid certificate of compliance will satisfy this obligation. So they will need to make sure it's in compliance. Well, a lot of times it's not. Then they're either escrowing for those repairs 1.5 times the amount of the bid, because it's winter right now. They can't replace a septic right now, but you can have Hof-Schulte go out there, drop a bid, and then submit that to the seller, or the seller can submit that to you. And then the seller agrees to pay for all escrow. So the actual creation of the escrow account with title. Okay, don't get on the hook of paying for the escrow account too. And 1.5 times the amount. Then when the work is done in May, if there's any money remaining, it gets cut back to the seller. Okay. You could put verbiage here. So should septic come back non-compliant, the seller agrees to pay for the septic to be replaced, or if time does not allow, seller agrees to pay for all, or it would be at the seller's sole expense for escrowing the replacement of the septic. Okay. And I have usually better verbiage, but that's the gist of it. Next, well. So if there's a well, it may or may not be on the property. Might be on a neighboring property serving 8 of the properties. If there is, then you need to have a written well agreement recorded. If there isn't one already, well, guess what? I'm going to make the seller pay for that too. That needs to be written by an attorney. It needs to be recorded, and it needs to state who's responsible for repairs and who's responsible for the electric bill that reads the meter on the well, and whose house is that connected to. There's a lot of little things that go into this. So if you don't know, please lean on an agent that does. Ask questions. Don't fail your way through it, okay? So again, I do 21 days.
She said 21 days. I'm like, hope she doesn't pick a different number than.
No, I like to do
I know,
21
I'm
because
like,
it gives them enough time.
Yeah.
And with well, there's so many stipulations that go in. You have to run the water for X amount of time. Some tests have to be done at the spigot. Some tests have to be inside at the sink. And then the Olmsted County Water Testing Lab is only open certain days of the week. And if you don't get it there before noon on Wednesday, and you already got the test, then you have to go back, get another test kit, and then go back to the property, There's all these little things, right? So again, lean on your agents that are used to this, and it also depends on the county, right? Some counties will go and do it for you. Sometimes the seller needs to do it. Maybe you're gonna be an extra nice agent and do it for them. Can create some liability, but depends on what you want to offer, right? So then you're also stating who's going to be obtaining it and paying for it. So that's negotiable. But this is really talking about water testing. We also want the well tested. I highly recommend it, right? At least the pump.
Testing water, and then the well is like the mechanism.
Correct. So I would put down here in my clause that the seller also agrees to have the well mechanicals tested and in working order, right? So if the well pump comes back and it's bad, then they're liable to replace that. Okay, so just extra things to protect your buyer. Okay, questions on writing an offer?
That was
My
amazing.
brain.
Yay, just soak it in. There's a lot. When you go to actually put this through Authentisign, you can learn that in that class, how to arrange everything, arrange the little names, signatures, all that kind of shit. Or you can get it prepped, ready, and then print it all out. Then go and meet with your clients in person and have them sign that way. If they're really old and don't know how to sign electronically, is really the only time I do that, because I've already prepped my buyers during my buyer consult for what to expect.
Right.
Okay, that's why buyer consults